Welcome to Biz Dev Live. My name is Cameron Toth, the host of Biz Dev Live, Monday through Friday at 11 a.m., bringing you information for entrepreneurs and business owners, talking to entrepreneurs and business owners to provide the valuable takeaways that help you get where you want to go. Show your love for Stephan Thieringer, who's on the show with me today. He's the host of Raw Rants. He is the founder of the Human Innovation Garage, and he's somebody that I've been really enjoying getting to know and participating with in his clubhouse group, the Entrepreneurs Cocktail. We've been doing some amazing work, talking to people, changing people's lives, all about opportunity and education, which is what I'm all about all the time. He is somebody that is a world top coach. We'll get into the bio in just a moment. All that and more right after the Biz Dev theme.
Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. This is business development, not even selling it. This is intelligent. If you watch it, I promise you benefit. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T.
So I'm bringing you Stephan Thieringer. I'm going to read the bio here. I'm going to put him big up on the screen, make him super uncomfortable being super large on the screen here. Mr. Stephan Thieringer. He is the founder, leader of the Human Innovation Garage. He's a leading coach and advisory firm working for almost a decade at the critical intersection of talent and business strategy. Our founder, Stephan K Thieringer, is a serial entrepreneur, business thinker, executive coach, and investor. In February 2020, he has been recognized as the World Human Resource Conference and the World Coaching Congress as a world's 101 top coaching leader and received various other global and national accolades over the years. For almost a decade, the Human Innovation Garage has empowered organizations and individuals by creating an organizational optimization blueprint, providing a roadmap for radical impact in areas of employment, trauma, executive alignment, leadership strategies, and overall stakeholder management. This proprietary and unique methodology combining research, data points, neuroscientific pattern identification, scientific assessment programs, workshops, training, and executive coaching provides clients rapid transformation and positions organizations for high impact. Man, I've had the pleasure of getting to know you over the past few weeks, couple months, and it's just amazing. And the big words in your bio are also big words that you use every day, but you really bring them down to earth and really bring the raw rant, if you will, the raw truth to people. I've seen people really be opened up. Like the onion they are, and get to the heart of the matter so quickly. You are the truth, my friend. So glad to have you on the show.
It's such an honor. I sometimes when I hear people's bio read, and particularly when it's your own, you're gonna go, "Holy shit! This is what I do?" And I think it's one of the things. I remember my father years ago. He was, and this is gonna sound kind of grabbed from space. He was knighted by the Pope, and I called him and I said to him, "So what did you now do in your life that you look back at and you say, I did that?" And my father's response, there was no response. There was complete silence. And frankly, I'll tell you honestly, I never want to be that guy, right? I want to be the guy who really, which is why I love what we're doing here, which is why I love what you do on Clubhouse. And I think you're so genuine about it. And the more I get to know you, you and I had some opportunity also to speak offline, very personal. I love it. So I'm honored to be here. I'm just so happy to be able to support you. And I got to tell you, I've never seen the introduction before, the BizDev Live music. I'm like jamming on, I want to turn my own music up. This is awesome. I love it, and I heard people talk about it. I've just never seen it, and it's fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I hear you talk about, incorporating the music. I would, if I didn't feel like it would be overall distracting for a show like this, I'd have music pumping the whole time.
Yeah.
Let's dance and talk, right? But
That's right. That's right.
It's a funny thing because I come from a background DJing. You were talking about, getting into sort of the inner DJ for your podcast that you're putting together, Raw Rants, and for me, that's literally my background. High school and early college days, I was DJing. but I'm also like this old man that, like, if I go to a party now, I get really pissed off if, like, during the cocktail section or like the eating section, like the music is too loud, because I'm like, I often want to hear people. I want to actually have a conversation. I enjoy the music, but I actually want to hear people as well. So I got the old man in me and the young guy battling it out sometimes. I want to dance, but I want to hear the value.
I don't think, actually, if I can quickly respond to that, Cameron, I don't think it has anything to do with old man. I think what it really has to do with, let me say something. I think there's a formality to it. I think there's, you come out of the hospitality industry. That's how I ended up in hospitality industry in the United States. It's actually going to be, I'm looking at the date, it's going to be in August. It's going to be 30 years that I came from Ritz-Carlton to Boston. And I think the part, what we don't talk enough about it, if that's in private life, if that's in stewardship we have for younger generation, if that's in business, we don't talk enough about grace, elegance, respect, the right amount of inclusion in business. And I'm not even alluding to the whole equity inclusion conversation here, but just simply by the respect we give each other. I think we're so quick to fire from the hip. And sometimes, that works. But I do believe that while we can be very blunt, very honest, very raw with each other, there needs to be some formality which respects each other, if for whatever reason that may be. And I think that's what you're talking about. And I do believe there's venues, there's events, there's situations where we just and guilty as charged, where sometimes we just forget that, and we got to find ways to remind each other and support each other, which is why I think having 5 generations in the workforce, and you are in the biz development world and in the business world, what you're providing tremendous resources for, having 5 generations in the workforce, we have such, as the older generation, doesn't matter if you're 1, 2, 3, 5 generations ahead, we have a stewardship responsibility, right?
Yeah.
And we need to call each other out, but also we need to appreciate the power of community. And that's bilateral. That's not just going from the older generation to the younger generation. The younger generation has such an opportunity, and I think many of them realize this, to nurture us as the old fart, so to speak, and giving advice, giving resource, giving access. Because when I grew up, when I would ask my father a question or I didn't know something, well, guess what it was? I had to go back to the book, to a library. There was no internet. There was not call a friend. There was not call a lifeline or go to a community and ask the question and drop it in there. That resource today, I mean, takeaway number 1, use your community and absolutely blow it up in terms of acknowledging that's what I'm good at. That's what I'm not good at. That's where I'm a resource. That's where I'm not. That's my core competency. That's where I'm not. And I think whenever you and I speak, whenever I hear you speak, and the people you pull together, also on your clubhouse, that's what you're all about. That's where you say, you know what, there's a resource for this. Here's a resource for that. And I've heard you do it many, many times. And I can only invite everybody listening here to do exactly the same thing and to say, you know what, that's exactly what I need to do. This is how I need to approach it. And I don't know, but be vulnerable and open about it. And I think that's the other thing, which is so important to own, to say, you know what, I just don't know.
Yeah, I think when older folks too, including folks my age at 42, say, oh, life is so different, from when I was a kid, I had to go back to an encyclopedia. It's obviously there's some, the encyclopedias on the shelf just don't make, economic sense anymore, but, and logistically, right? Because the world's changing so fast and things are updated online. But, I have the same problem with my 10-year-old who's asking me questions, and I'm like, stop it. That's what the computer, that's what Google is for. You can find the information yourself. And when you make it too easy for
Yeah.
somebody to get the
Yeah.
information, they don't value it, right? It's a
Well, but there's
skin in the game thing. Yeah.
right. There's also laziness, right? I mean, I have a lot of my clients where I mean, I literally had yesterday a conversation with somebody who's a brilliant technologist, and they're in the world of robotics. And one of the pieces they challenge with as they grow their team, they're bringing more people on. Okay, great. So now they have this guy who's like this god of engineering, so to speak. And instead of just looking it up or going to a resource which they have created technical manuals and researching it and looking for it, they just walk across the hallway, and the poor guy gets disrupted all the time. Instead of being able to focus on what he wants to focus on, his mind's going. And I said to him yesterday, I said, so is this laziness and they're just trying to take a shortcut? Or are you just fishing for them now? But they'll never learn to fish. And I think that's the piece where there's a really fine balance between, a righteous pushback versus a supportive pushback, which is, hey, listen, you know what? Here's the answer. I'm going to give you a little bit. Here's a taste of the answer. But to get the completeness of it, you need to go here or here or here, whatever the resource may be, Google. Or
I think, and I think we've all gotten the phone call from somebody that, I couldn't recall this. I know that
right,
I'm
right,
calling you. And I think that phone call is fine, especially if it's, in your wheelhouse. It's something, it's great opportunity to talk to each other. It's when it becomes constant, like a
yeah,
constant interruption.
yeah,
I'm just not going to look something up. I'm just going to reach out to Stephan rather than
yeah,
looking in the book or
right,
doing a search. And you know what? It's fine if you're my client and you're paying me to do that, right? It's not fine if this is, a relationship that's supposed to be mutually beneficial and you're just taking advantage of me, whether that's in the workplace,
right,
outside with individuals,
yeah,
or client,
yeah,
relationship. I think it's a really, really interesting dynamic because it leads to
yeah,
those things like burnout. I know in the education space, it's a particular problem, right? An epidemic inside of
yeah,
like public schools and that sort of thing, because you get that not only from the students, but then you get the administration, people being
yeah,
lazy, and then that just drives you to burnout
yeah,
because it's like, I don't,
yeah,
I educate students all day. Why should I be educating my colleagues? And then if you want to pull that over to the inclusion space, that gets to a whole nother thing. Oh, you are the one brown person or Asian
yeah.
person, or, in the room, can you answer these questions on the behalf of you're like, oh man, like now it's
Yeah, but
a step beyond.
there's so much you just brought into it, right? I
Yeah.
think one is yes, the laziness. The other one is fear. I mean,
Yeah.
I think there's a level of transparency about every action we take today that makes it very obvious what we do and what we don't do. And news travels fast, and good news travels fast, and before you know it, you become the bad news. And I think we have to be very conscious of that, but also we have to give people a space where we don't have to have that constant fear of that. And I think that's what having that constant fear or that awareness around it also takes away the beauty of, innovation and whatever that innovation may be. Because I mean, innovation is one of those things. I mean, look at the world around you. I mean, that's figure out what works, what doesn't work, and how can you create something out of the many pieces around us that may have suddenly a different impact or that may affect people differently, or where something doesn't work, it suddenly works differently. And I think that's where there's so much fear involved. There's so much, obvious consequence sometimes there, that the chances you were able to take maybe 30 years ago, where nobody knew about it because you did something stupid, but it became something brilliant. Suddenly you do something stupid and then you're stupid. And it's hard to recover. And I always make this joke between West Coast and East Coast. I think the West Coast is much more forgiving, right? You screw up and you blow $1 million or $2 million, and somebody says to you, "Good, what did you learn? Excellent. Let me give you 5 more because I know you'll never make that mistake again." On the East Coast, it's kind of like, "Oh, you blew $1 million for me? Go away. Don't ever fucking call me again." Right. So that's a little bit I mean, that's the extreme, and no disrespect for anybody who's seeing this, listening, who's an
New
investor.
York, New York patients versus California patients, the way you're
Well, it's not
talking
so much the
about that.
patient. It's not so much the patients. I think even New Englanders, Bostonians are different than New Yorkers there. I think New Yorkers are more what I know from the VC community and from the investor side is probably more so West Coast than East Coast, which is interesting. But
well, you got folks that have made their money on investments, on taking bets, right?
Yeah. And I think that's the other part. If you're investing, I mean, depending on if you're doing it for a living, you're doing it as an angel, or whichever level you do it at, you got to realize what investment is, right? Investment is not a guarantee. I mean, even if you look at the very successful, if the General Catalyst and other companies which are here in Boston, not directly in the city, but outside in the suburbs, they've taken a lot of chances on, and sometimes it's not about just the analytical brain. It's about the gut. It's about the heart. And oftentimes the way you connect with an exceptional team is not necessarily through logic and a bio. It's right here on your chest, which is instinct, heart, and gut. And if you take a bet there, and there's this old saying, you may invest into an A-, B+ market and product, but you will never invest into a A-, B+ team. You will always, always, always look for the A+ team.
Yeah. Talk to me. I want to bring back a little bit of structure here. What are you doing right now? Because I want to get into your story, because I think it's going to be interesting for people to get a little bit more insight to who Stephan is. But what are the current services that you offer? How are you currently helping people?
So the company I've run for almost a decade now, which really came out of, I started 6 companies, 3 I talk about, 3 not so much, which I think gives me the right of talking about more or less or different. And that's not right in terms of entitlement, but I've seen my own errors, my own mistakes, and others, plenty of those. And we'll talk about that a little more. And I'm looking forward to it. Is they're not just on the professional side, but they're also on the personal side. And so, and I think the first mystery I want to take away for people is that you have a personal life and you have a business life. If you can't align on both sides, values, intention, you're just, I think ultimately you're fooling yourself. So what I do today, I run a company, the Human Innovation Garage. The inspiration is really the human, where we are, as we just talked about. We all have inherent brilliance. We all have pieces that are just fantastic. On the second level, then, is the innovation piece, where, if you kind of look around inside yourself and allow other people to see that, suddenly you'll find pieces which can serve and support you and others in this context in fantastic, glorious ways. And then the third part is the tool set, which is the garage, kind of where you drop your car off and they got a lot of tools to fix your car. So there is like some support structure, some framework, some processes, procedures, methodologies. Like you talked earlier about the corporate optimization blueprint, which is a methodology, which is essentially augmenting all the things from assessment and cognitive and behavioral assessments all the way to parts of an intervention based on coaching, staff training, workshops, etc. So that's where I spent the majority of my time, in then really advisory with organizations on talent optimization, which is exactly, we're all very clear what the business strategy is. We're all very clear, what we want the business results to be. But the part we don't look at enough is kind of the engine which drives it, which is people. And it doesn't matter what business it is; it's always people where it ultimately sources back to.
Just to give some context for folks, because you've won awards on the coaching side. Yeah. You're working with some different companies. Just give the people an idea of companies, brands that you're working with in general, just so that folks get an idea of the type of work you're doing for what types of companies.
So it's really agnostic of companies. I mean, I've worked with companies like Bank of America, Shields Healthcare, Santander, real estate companies from Revise to mortgage companies in Fairway and Chase, and companies like Ministry of Supply, who's a clothing company, companies and employees of companies like Accenture, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a long list, McKinsey, Boeing, et cetera. And so it's, and in some instances, it's the companies. In some instances, it's one individual out of the company. And in some instances, it's the individual in the company who ultimately influences the direction of the company. So the impact intention there is always nuanced, but in the end, it becomes, I love it because it's extremely rewarding. I think it's something that the beacon for me. I came through hospitality industry 30 years ago.
So let me kind of set up the story for you, because I want you to tell the long form. I want you to get into how you got into coaching, because I think for a lot of people, and especially during the last year, it's interesting, because if you're in the events thing, like, wow, all these virtual events people popped out of the woodwork. There wasn't all these virtual events, but now everybody's a virtual event pro. And I think over the last, especially over the last year, 14, 15 months, I have noticed that there's a lot more visibility of coaches out there. So, talking about, what a coach does and the value of a coach and what you should be looking
Yeah.
into a coach, I think is something that we definitely want to answer for folks, for people, in addition to the takeaways that we have. But what did little Stephan want to do when he was growing up, and kind of walk us through that journey?
So it's funny. Little Stefan. So my dad was a politician, and my dad got picked up every morning at 7:30, and I was dropped off in school. And that was starting from grammar school all the way out to it's the equivalent of high school, but we call it gymnasium, which is not a gym. But my absolute dream was to be actually a gas station attendant, and here's why. My As a family, we drove an Audi then, and my dad always, because he was in public office, he was being from the city of Stuttgart, he was always driving Mercedes. And what I loved about it was the more windows these cars had, the better it was. And here's the deal. If you remember the old cars, there was not just a big window which goes down in one piece on the right and the back and in the front. There was like in each window, there was like the main window, and then there was a little window behind it. So it was like two windows on every part. So the whole car was about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 windows, right? And I could not wait when we would get to the gas station, jump out and take the squeegee and clean the car. And the obsession was not just having it clean, but the obsession was the way I still today, when I put jam or I put butter or I put Nutella on a piece of bread, it has to be like a mirror. Even until that happens, I cannot eat it. It is, and that same obsession I had is with the windows. I mean, it needed to be that way. So that was the thing for me. I wanted to be a gas station attendant. I was the guy jumping out. Didn't matter where it was, when it was. I went with my father's driver. I would go fill the gas tank and just to wipe the windows, even if there was no need to wipe the windows. So it's that obsession. So to answer your question, I wanted to be a gas station attendant. That was awesome. That's what I wanted to be.
So walk us through this. How did we get from gas station attendant desires to the Ritz Carlton and beyond here?
So for me, my mom was very, very outgoing. My mom for a long time worked in hospitality in the wider realm of tourism, actually, in a city called Heidelberg. Many of you may know, and that's where she was from. And for that matter, very, very different than my dad. So my mom, unfortunately, almost now 26 years ago, she had just had her anniversary, passed at a young age. And my dad, the politician, so my mom was very fun. She was outgoing. My dad was more contained about the politician image, the image manager, where a lot of, hopefully we'll get to some of that as well.
And frame for folks where you grew up and what role you're...
Yeah. So in Stuttgart, Germany, my father was a mayor. Okay. Just to give some context there. And he was it for 26 years. So the majority of my adult life, he had to retire by public office at the age of 65. And he's now 93 years old. So I've lived with that quite a bit, for a long time of my life. And so, my mom was always the one who pushed me to do different things. So I think the expectation was, I'm going to go to the only schools, or the school system at that time was 13 years. I'm going to come out of school and then I'm going to go to university and I'm going to study and I'm going to become, a veterinarian, which is at some point I wanted to be a veterinarian. And then I still love, animals today. Sometimes in the back when my dog crawls around.
Windshield wiper, gas station attendant to veterinarian.
So
cycling through the careers here.
Yeah. So exactly. So then the veterinarian, it kind of ended before I came out of school. I was a terrible, terrible student because I think I always made it more about like being a stubborn kid and punishing the teacher. Well, that doesn't work so well when you're in school, because the reverse is that the teacher gives you. So in Germany, we had grades 1 through 6, and I kind of flew by, and there's a lot of subjects. So 5 is a no pass. You got to do it again. And 4 is just you kind of fly by. So I was kind of there was a couple of subjects I always was between 4 and 5. Not good. But it's funny, And so then my mom said, you should try hospitality after school. I did that and had an internship at a hotel and absolutely loved the interaction with people. And that was the key moment, right? Mm-hmm. Interaction with people. That was kind of the beacon light for me all the way through in all my careers and what I do today. And so that's what connected me to hospitality. I was training then with a hospitality company, went to hospitality management school, and then came in 1991 for Ritz-Carlton Hotels after I was working in a leading hotel of the world as one of the youngest hotel managers at the age of 24 in a city outside of Frankfurt. And so that connected me to a guy, and I got the key from the general manager. And that was, and I want to, let me just put an exclamation mark here. There's these moments of opportunity. And this is again going back to where we started earlier: community, access, resources, ask for something. And ask always, there can be a no or a yes. But oh my God, can your life change when there is a yes? I was this morning, so let me finish the story and then I'm going to go to the story this morning in Whitney, Houston. So I was given the key by the general manager to pick up a guy at the airport. He said, "Go pick Siggy Brauer up at the airport." And the general manager of the hotel I worked for, he had a brand new Audi A8, and we're going back to 1991. And so he gives me his key and he says, "Here, go pick Siggy Brauer up." Now, what I didn't know when I first got the key is that Siggy Brauer was the co-founder and regional director of Ritz-Carlton Hotels. He was one of the original 3 guys who founded Ritz-Carlton Hotels. And the first original Ritz-Carlton Hotel, what some people may not know, is the Boston location. It's not the Ritz in France. It's the Ritz-Carlton here in Boston. And the chandeliers from the original Ritz-Carlton, actually the blue chandeliers and the main dining room at the Ritz here in Boston on Arlington Street, which is now reopening at a different hotel and a different brand, that was the color blue, which became the corporate color for Ritz-Carlton. And so Ritz-Carlton then later was acquired by Marriott Hotels, and that's what the brand is under now. But to make a long story short, that was kind of my introduction. And I remember, little things like I came here and I was like the German walking down the hallway saying, "Hello." After 2 weeks, Siggy pulls me into his office and says, "You have failed." He would never speak a word of German with me. And he would say to me, "You have failed. People perceive you as rude. People think you're not friendly." And I said, "But I'm saying hello." "Well, say hello. How are you? And be empathetic." Now, he didn't say be empathetic, but it was kind of the first introduction to actually, in a sincere way, how do we connect with each other? How do we make a connection? Or when like, let's give another hospitality example. Oftentimes we go to restaurants and we walk up to the podium and there's the host or 2 hosts or 3 hosts or 5 hosts, and they all stare at us. And what's the question they ask us? "Hi, table for 2?" And you're like 2 people standing there and you want to say, "What am I, 20? I'm 2, right? Or is there 15 people behind me?" And I will never, ever forget it. Siggy says to me, when I was standing up in the lounge in the tea room, and the host next to me, who I was like just hanging out to have a little bit of conversation, he says, "Mr. Brauer, table for 2." And he stops. He lets his guests seated by me. I come back and he goes, "Gentlemen, here's the thing. Don't ever, when 2 people show up in your restaurant, ask them table for 2. Talk about the weather. Ask them how they are. Make a conversation. Because if they need more than 2, they'll tell you." And it was such an interesting thing, and I use that a lot today also. I love working with companies who are, Tom Peters' Pursuit of Wow, right? Creating wow customer experiences, really going that next level. And you're a hospitality guy. I'm preaching to the choir here.
When you were talking about it, it's one of those examples that I use time and time again in interviews to show people, because it's an experience that everybody's had. You've walked into a chain restaurant, you've been there while they sort of almost ignored you, right? And you've gotten that "hello, how many in your party" kind of conversation, which is totally going through the motions, totally robotic, right? It doesn't need a human being to talk about. I love that you had that conversation with Siggy Brauer, because, immediately you're getting the idea that, hey, you're wasting words instead of, going through the motions. Because I've never been a guy, I freak out almost when somebody sends me a message through LinkedIn and they say, "How you doing?" I like, what? Like, I don't, especially when I don't even know you, like, it's what is that? Like, I don't know what to do with that. I just don't know, because it's, it's not, we don't know each other. It's not empathetic. It's not a real question. How am I supposed to answer that? So when you get that question, at the entryway to a restaurant, why are you asking me how I'm doing? Hey, tell me something amazing about, the experience.
Right.
ask me a question if I'm celebrating something special, if there's something, these are conversations that lead down different pathways and show an empathy to my situation that, how many in your party does not?
Yeah, well, and I mean, you just brought up a fantastic point. I mean, it's like this management by walking around. Doesn't matter if it's in hospitality or business, or if you're a business owner. I mean, think about it. How many times, and again, guilty as charged. How many times have we walked down a hallway in our organizations, or we've walked by someone else's desk and said, "Hey, how you doing? You doing all right?" And it's this thing where, and it's like I just learned this funny thing from somebody. When they didn't do an asterisk, comma, asshole, comma, like, right? Hey, you're doing all right, comma, asshole. Like, it's like this question of like, I don't really care how you feel, and I don't want you to respond, but I'm just still asking you, so I have checked the box of asking you how you are.
Well,
And I think,
I'm just going to enter here. We were talking about feedback yesterday in the Master Networks meeting, and this idea that if I ask you, how did the event go, right? And this is something that I think all our organizations,
yeah,
you're doing services, you want to understand how to improve your business. So you can ask, you have a couple options, right? You could ask, how did it go? Or you could ask specifically, hey, is there anything that really went well?
that's right. That's right.
Is there anything that we could specifically improve?
Well, I
And
saw
and
yes.
then there's a real question, right?
I love that. And I think that's the piece, right? You got to be very specific, and you got to give people an opportunity to answer specifically to how they are, how they feel, what it is that just happened, what was their personal experience. I saw yesterday on LinkedIn somebody who I really respect highly, and he's one of the creators in a category, or creator actually, of the company who we are a global partner with, and we use it for the assessments, which is Predictive Index. Drew is his name. And Drew, yesterday or the day before yesterday, on his LinkedIn, he posted exactly this. Don't ask people if they're okay. And I talk about it all the time, but ask them how they're feeling. How are you feeling? Because if I say to you, you're okay, it's like I'm implying that you better be okay. When I'm saying to you,
Right.
hey, Cameron, how are you feeling? And I say it with, I think that's the other thing, voice, we're starting to pay more attention to voice again. I think that the pandemic has done that. And then you and I have spent some significant time on Clubhouse, and I've heard this resonating with a lot of people. And I think in a room that you and I were together in not too long ago, somebody actually said it. We're starting to listen to voice, and we recognize that voice, there's an intonation, consistency, there's a clarity, there's an authenticity about it. That voice is probably a huge reflection of values and who you are on a consistent, regular basis.
It comes down to time, right? It's the value proposition, right? If I'm texting, if I'm emailing you, and people talk about picking up the phone, and listen, I understand. You said guilty as charged. I understand not wanting to pick up the phone, not wanting to spend the time getting into a lengthy conversation when you're trying to just get shit done.
Right.
You're in that mode, but the idea that I can ask a question and you understand a world more of information based on the tone and inclination of my voice and where I'm coming from,
Right.
it cuts through so much. But we're calling down a path here, and I want to go back to the story. So you're at Ritz-Carlton. I want to get us to how you became an entrepreneur, how you got into the whole coaching game. So take us through through hospitality to where you are now.
So fast forward was with Ritz-Carlton. Then as a last career move in hospitality, I was working in New York. Property there was the Waldorf Astoria. Was there part of that group for about 3 years, which was a brilliant experience. And I think at that point, after working in hospitality in Europe, going over there, and that was in '97. I want to say I probably burned out a little bit. And was introduced to a gentleman who I had actually reached out to about software and how software works in the context of catering software for hospitality. And I called him, and we met locally here. I was living in New York, but I was still connected to Boston. And he explained it to me, and then I called him 2 days later, and I explained it back to him just to clarify that I understood it correctly. And I guess it intrigued him so much that I actually got what he explained to me, which was probably more of a fire hose exercise for him than anything else. Very genuine, but nevertheless, I mean, if anybody knows anybody who is very technical and we just speak different languages, I was able to understand that, but also I was suddenly intrigued about what technology can do, how technology works. And fast forward, we then in the late 90s, so I then went to the dark side of entrepreneurship. A big part for me was that I wanted to be back in the city in Boston because my daughter and her mom were here in Boston. Mm-hmm. So that's why Boston for me was always kind of the homecoming, regardless where I was living. And I like Boston. I think Boston, particularly if you come from Europe, is considered one of the 2-3 cities which are very, it's easy to adjust. There's the size of the city. I mean, Boston, no disrespect, Bostonians, Boston is a tiny little city with 700,000 people, even though Boston behaves like it's a World Metropolitan Opera center house, but it's not. But it's also the shortest way to Europe. So for me, via London, the UK, certainly Germany, my hometown, Stuttgart is accessible very quickly from here. But so the journey then started in technology. We built one of the first LMS. At that time, it was called ASP based, which then now we talk about SaaS and PaaS, learning management systems. Funny enough, as the German, I was actually representing the United States on their IEEE on a workshop group we called like a work core group, which was called SE36, which was talking about and implementing global interoperability standards between learning content and learning platforms. So I got a lot to see what that does and how it works. And very quickly, we found a partner in a law firm here in Boston, which I'm still immensely grateful for today, which back then was Goodwin, Procter and Hoare. Today, it's only Goodwin Procter. And when they were still located at State Street. And we basically had a content partner, and our training was sexual harassment, discrimination, and then we added diversity. I certainly didn't imagine that, 20 years later, we're still going to be talking with even greater intensity about it, which is on one side sad to see, but at the same time also, I think all the network effect in terms of transparency of my actions, other people's actions, is much more out there. So I'm sure it was not any less or any more significant back then. Just today, whatever anybody does is, like I said earlier, suddenly somebody becomes the good or the bad news before they know it.
When you're talking about things, I mean, it's interesting when you look back at the historical foundings of the United States, and then you're talking about services and stuff that's building on this whole globalization theme, right? Where we're all more connected, and there's the business ties to it. And it's interesting because we live in a world where, depending on the country you're in, discrimination is perfectly legal in other places still. It was perfectly legal not too long ago. Within some of our lifetimes, there was just an incredible adversity for anybody that wasn't a white male trying to make their way up any ladder. Sort of interesting as Biden was talking from the stage yesterday, in the historical moment of just having, it's interesting, right? Because it's a story. You have two women behind the president of the United States, the vice president, and the speaker of the House. And that's a story. So it speaks to the fact that, we have such a long way to go, because our stories, we have so much work to get an equitable playing field for so many, poverty being such a huge issue, and then just having equity on the table. And I think, with the work that you're doing in companies, we're always looking for, the BBD, the bigger, better deal. But I think so many people like yourself, like I am, are also focused on how can we impact the world in a way that fundamentally changes the dynamics of the past. So first of all, kudos on you for being in this work for as long as you have been. And I know that, especially in the place, white males have a particular position of power that we've just been gifted by birth, for better, for worse, however you want to take it. So for folks that are working in this space that speak up when there's an issue, I know I was speaking to somebody this morning about, an institution that I'm involved with where the inclusion just isn't there. And so we have a particularly responsible piece to do that part. So again, we don't always get
Yeah.
a pat on the back, and I'm not saying we deserve one, but I'm happy to give that to you
Listen,
because I think it's important work.
it's tremendously important work, and I was introduced. Actually, I was doing a couple of clubhouse sessions with a gentleman, Dr. Brian Hodgkins, who is a leading. I don't want to call him a researcher, but let's call him a researcher. He does a lot of work around inner city kids, reverse discrimination, and he is African American himself. Can certainly speak from experience. And one of the books, and that's why I want to mention him quickly. One of the books he recommended to me is Waking Up White. And it's a fantastic, fantastic book. I read it before our first official interaction when we were hosting a room on Clubhouse. And it's this realization of, I think as let's call it, as you just said it, a privileged white male. And the bald head's not helping me on top of that. And you look at this and you suddenly realize, so I think there was always this thinking in my head, and it's interesting because it resonated with me in the book. As white males, middle-aged, we're neutral, right? We're like Caucasian neutral. Well, we're not, right? We're not. We're part of the opportunity, the problem, the challenge, whichever way we want to turn or twist it. And I think the awareness and inclusion is what it all pulls down to. And Brian reiterated that multiple times in conversations and dialogues. We had not just one-on-one, but with groups of people. Because there needs to be an awareness there that when I'm in a room with 15 other board members and they're all middle-aged white men, well, something's not right. And it's not just about black and white and brown and green and orange and yellow. It's about women. It's about LGBTQ. It's about all the various things that we need to have diverse awareness of. And being able to say, if you're in this room and you notice that, being able to say, you know what, guys, we got to think about what we're doing here. And that is, I think, the biggest challenge that in the work on around diversity, that there's so much fear within leadership groups to actually address the elephant in the room, which says, look at us. Anybody's looked in the mirror recently? We got to make a difference. And it's not about designating one person in the company as the chief diversity officer, and let's make that somebody who is falling under one of those diverse groups, which we think we are not representing enough. That to me, in all due respect, anybody who does that to me is total bullshit. Are there people out there who are fantastic at the role that they play? Yes, absolutely. I want to acknowledge that as well. But I think we need to systemize it much, much more. We need to engineer it into the organization that it becomes really an authentic movement rather than a policy and a document that says, well, we've decided that's what we need to do.
We have a challenge, right? As a society, there is a segments of the population that are going to criticize and vilify anything that, starts
100%.
capturing a buzzword like woke. But what is woke? Woke is simply being aware, like you're pointing to, being aware that there's a system, there's an institution, there's a culture that, is there. And, people are quick to latch on to, okay, we have a point, maybe this is over politicized. I know you're a guy that likes to spit his fair share of F-bombs and, these are things that, for polite society, maybe they're going to have a problem with. And there's always somebody that's going to have an issue. Oh, this is too woke and this is that. But the idea that you throw the baby out with the bathwater just isn't right? We got to understand that there's nuance in the world. And just because something's a step too far for you doesn't mean that all the steps are wrong or aren't worthwhile because it's a step too far for you. So I definitely appreciate that work. So I want to go back to the story so we have some time to talk about takeaways. So you founded some companies, got into some of this SaaS work, some of the advising work for corporations. You built companies that were acquired by other companies. So you've had some success in your history here as an entrepreneur. How do we get to being recognized as a top coach and the Human Innovation Garage? I know I probably kind of reversed the order there, but talk to us about how that transition happened for you.
There was a lot of curiosity because I think people always, again, it was very clear to me that people ultimately drive organizations. In retrospect, I always got good feedback from people. I think we all do, right? Once we leave organizations, they all say, oh, you were the greatest. But and I'm being purposely facetious here, but I always had good feedback, and I always enjoyed building teams, and I always enjoyed building what we today in our organization and in organizations in general, we talk about high performing culture, we talk about high performing teams, building dream teams, et cetera, et cetera. The other part, which was always fun for me, and I just recently thought about that, is I love team sports. I love soccer. I love volleyball. Even when I was on biking competitively, I always enjoyed when we had a team competition on the road bikes, which was not just one guy goes off the front. It was kind of like the way the Tour de France works, right? There's what they call domestiques. Like there's some people work for the guy who's the top guy, or other people work for someone else. There's a dynamic there, which there's a fascination for me about this dynamic. And taking that really has ultimately, kind of walked me along. I heard about coaching. I mean, kind of the way people hear about coaching today. I was connected to a guy who has a coaching academy down in Florida. I called him. He says, come down here. I'll explain it to you. I learned more about it. I heard about ICF, which is the International Coaching Federation, et cetera, and accreditation and frameworks and all these things. But very quickly, and for anybody who's thinking about becoming a coach, I mean, I think there's two things to it. Find some relevance and decide who you want to be, right? There's a distinct difference between being an executive coach, a business coach. There's a lot of, I think the life coaching industry, we were talking about coaching earlier. I think it's projected to be in the next year a $22 billion industry, which is just mind-blowing when you think about where it came from. But I think it also...
I love this piece, and Lynn Rowe, who we both know, talks about the value of a coach is, because anybody can tell you to exercise. And obviously you bring a lot of unique information to the table, experience to the table, which I think for folks that are looking for executive coaching, getting Bob or Joe off the street that may not have a entrepreneurship, leading a large company kind of thing, and expecting that person to take you to the next level because they're a little bit cheaper, probably the wrong way to do it. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because we have a lot of people that, are, I hate to pick on like the social media professionals out there, but I see this all the time, like people pitching me on, how they're going to, help me get to the next level with my social media so I can earn millions of dollars. Meanwhile, they can't get past, 1,000 and numbers aside, right? because I don't want to make it a numbers game, but if you're not doing it for yourself on social media, how are you going to do it for me? I don't get it. I don't understand it. Right. So talk to us a little bit about, what it was like sort of choosing to kind of go down the coaching road. And we're going to talk later today, me and Steve Spiro on the Master Connection series about imposter syndrome. Yeah. How did you, get to that place where you could really truly feel comfortable coaching others?
So I think, wow, there's a lot of things you just
just focus on the immediate question there. And then I think what we can do is just talk about, for people that are going to purchase coaching services. Yeah.
So I think
given the takeaways, given some values, what they should be looking for and how they should actually pick a coach to work with them.
So let me give a couple of pieces, and that's mostly about me. With your permission, Cameron, I'll do
Please.
That. I think my personal journey in terms of, what is really the difference between executive coaching and business coaching, and why I can work agnostic, is because I really focus on the individuals. And individuals bring, let's call it a tool bag and kind of a suitcase with themselves, which is kind of their past experiences, which is in my coaching practice, for example, with executives, I talk about executive trauma. And let's talk about this for a second. Executive trauma is simply the fact of that somebody has an experience, like any other trauma as well. And then based on that experience, they develop a coping mechanism. Let me explain. There's a situation, you and I interact, I need something, you do something, I'm getting or I'm not getting, and then there's a delta, which is kind of the empty space. To fill that empty space, I'm going to start developing a particular pattern of a habit, or I'd start developing a particular pattern of performance, action, whatever it may be, to fill that space. And that could be all kinds of things, right? It's almost like very similar the way addictions happen or whatever else it may be. So how do we, to kind of continue playing on that and building on that, how do we recover from that? So we have to have awareness around that. That is the role of a good executive coach, which is asking the questions. And it's not about, this is the big difference between a business coach and an executive coach. A business coach, oftentimes what I see business coaches doing is they step under the role of a consultant. They say, in order for you to do this business, like the guy who you refer to on social media who says, hey, Cameron, we're going to make you $1 million if you get, okay. Be a business coach, not to me. Ask me the question, what have I not done? How have you journeyed along over the last year? And how have you organized your time in making social media a priority? Excellent. Why don't you go find out who's the best person to help you with social media? Let's do some research. Let me connect you with 5 people here, 6 people there who are really, really good resources for that. And that's not the perfect description of what the difference between, in this instance, an executive coach and a business coach is, but it speaks to why in your head have you had the limiting belief of that you can't do certain things. For you to start your show, think back when you started BizDev Live. When you started BizDev Live, there was probably a lot of maybe even negative self-talk. I can't do this. I don't want to do this. Oh my God. Maybe you wanted to have a particular guest on the show. Am I going to ask that person or not?
I think that came long before, as I was knowing that I needed to start something. Once the decision was made, things got a little bit easier. But before that, leading up to that, because I think so many people are waiting, and they're waiting for exactly those reasons.
And that's what it is. I mean, there's a study out from Stanford University, and they interviewed 50 Fortune 500 leaders. And you know what their number one biggest fear was? To be discovered as a fraud. So it's not about, oh, my fear is that. No, because imposter syndrome, that fear of, am I the right person? How did I get here? Oh my God, I can't do this. I'm X, Y, and Z. These are big, big, big pieces, which we all deal with on a day-to-day basis. So for me, really, the work today with executives is about being a mirror, being a sounding board, helping understand their own actions and reflection by being somebody who has self-awareness in the context of, yes, we can talk about emotional intelligence, about self-awareness, self-management, and then social awareness and relationship management, but it goes beyond that. And the reason why I don't want to say I've earned the right to do it is because when I talk about authenticity, alignment of integrity is a big, big part. For a long, long, long time in my personal life and my business life, there was no alignment, right? There was like, oh, I have a big story in business, but my personal life, I was giving myself rights and reasons, which just completely distracted me. I self-destructed essentially. And there's a reason. I mean, I'll share this if I may. There's a reason why I started writing a book called Breaking My Own Heart. So to catch everybody up, and you notice, Cameron, I had literally 15 months ago, I had a heart attack. And I'm not talking a heart attack where you lie down, you get a stent, and you walk out. No, I got the full works with a quadruple bypass. And what I'm immensely grateful for is, and that sounds silly, that I had it because it was discovered what I had. But more importantly, also, I completely realized that all the things I had done before, and I was already in the process of having cleaned all of that up, but all the things I'd done before, our bodies react to that. Right? There's a reason why I recommend to clients, hey, listen, meditation is a big thing. Gratitude exercises in the morning is a big thing. Doesn't matter who you are. If you're the chairman of a billion-dollar company or the CEO of a startup, does not matter. Meditation, exercise, get some dopamine rush in the morning. It sets your day up completely differently. You get time in the afternoon, do a second workout because trust me, it's like just when I travel internationally, I go work out because my jet lag goes away because my body chemistry is anticipating that and is fighting it.
It's
and we are
wild.
we're wild.
I'm just going to jump in and just say that it's wild how often, and I think people forget, and I don't know if that's, where coaches come in, where, family has to do an intervention depending on who you're talking about, where you're talking about, and what level you're talking about. But the idea that so much of the many solutions for the business environment and the day of productivity that so many people are looking for in their lives goes back to these physical, mental pieces that don't
100%.
necessarily have anything to do with a marketing plan or a strategic budget or any of these really brainy pieces of the corporate business structure.
But it's the important piece is to contextualize it and to realize that when I don't do or when I do, then this is how I get triggered, right? I mean, there's somebody who I've done some work with, and I know personally, Marshall Goldsmith, who's considered one of the top 50 business coaches in the world and business thinkers. And he wrote a book years ago, Triggers. And then the second book he wrote was What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Just leave it at that. That's it. That says everything it is. And that's sometimes what we have to, we have to recognize, because I think sometimes we move from position to position to position, or we have people who are in senior executive roles, which I've worked with clients like this. Oh, we have XYZ in the organization, and interesting enough, the third person in her team quit, or the fifth person in his team got fired. Why is that? Okay, it becomes symptomatic, but that's not the diagnosis. So let's look at it. What's really happening here? So things like, okay, how can we prepare you better to enter into your day? How can we help you recognize that certain interactions that you expose yourself to or should not expose yourself to, they trigger you? Boundaries, big conversation. It's not just about personal boundaries at home and personal life. Boundaries are about business. I mean, Jack Welch said it years ago. No, Warren Buffett said it. You have to say no to more things than you say yes to things. That's a boundary. Saying no is a boundary.
Well,
Nothing wrong with
I think this is a good segue into some of these takeaways that you have, and I want to make sure we give to people. So I'm going to jump into this first one. Trust commands teams. So talk to us about that in terms of relation. You're working on building a team. Maybe you have a team already.
Yeah.
Talk to us about how this, the human element of this, how that all fits in, and why it's important, first of all, to build that trust, and how people actually do it.
Trust is a creation of ultimately, moving that I to we. Again, I want to give another recommendation to people. Conversational Intelligence, a book by Judith Glaser. I knew Judith herself. Unfortunately, she's no longer with us, but she did a lot of work around that. She actually has a group in New York, or an institute she founded. I think it still exists. It's called the We Institute. And it all talks about, when I enter into a room or into any situation, initially there's the I. So how do I go from I that I'm starting to see the we? And a big part of that is actually going back to, how can I influence the other person, or be aware myself what is happening in my body chemistry? And as body chemistry changes, serotonin, oxytocin, my relaxation to be willing to see the we comes much more to the surface. So it's about empathetic conversation. It's about mirrored conversation as a basic thing. Asking questions. We talked earlier about it. Hey, Cameron, how are you feeling? And you give me a response, and I said, and then I'm giving an empathetic response. And the empathetic response is, I'm sorry to hear that. And then maybe, as a simple tool set to say, you know what, when I had a similar experience, can I share that with you? Maybe that will help you. And you say yes.
So
let me share that.
I want to chime in here, because I run into this all the time, because I have a disparate, workforce, sort of gig economy. Everybody's employees, W-2, W-4, but they're on call. They work when they want to work when they're available, when the work's available. Over the last year, been very challenging. But even during a normal year, I may not see many of the people that actually work under me most of the time. And this is not uncommon in a lot of corporate organizations. The CEO, the owner of the company, doesn't necessarily see all the people that are working for him all the time. And so that difference between, I'm reaching out to you to check in on a job, and that working side by side. Now, let me be on a job with somebody, and we're having a conversation, and we're working together. That trust level, you can feel it. You can feel the difference.
But just think very, just yesterday, and I want to invite this. I mean, we talked about raw rents, and in probably about 4 weeks or so, I'm going to release something I just recorded yesterday with somebody. At the core, we're all kids, right? And at the core, we want to be seen. We want to know that we matter. We want to know that we have whatever contribution it is that we're making, that contribution is being recognized. Just keep that in mind, at top of mind. If I allow you to know that I see you and I communicate with you, it's basically the way, if you sit with your wife at dinner and you don't listen, well, your wife's not going to continue talking, or she's going to call you out on it, and she's going to say, hey, you're not present. Presence, consciousness is something which is so important, because we constantly live in a society. What's next? What's next? What's next? Right? There's this thing about intention, and I just talked about this yesterday. Intention in a Buddhist Zen way is all about being in the moment and right here, right now. It's not about future. It's not about what's my purpose in life. It's about joy right here, right now, presence with the person I'm with. If you can get that to the bottom of it, in letting people know you see them, you're with them, there is presence, and not ask stupid cliche questions, but they're real. You're vulnerable, you're open, you're sharing, you're connecting, you're acknowledging. That alone makes a slew of a difference. And I think the other thing is, I mean, today's CEO is coming out of COVID and now journeying hopefully into a very different 2021 and second half of 2021. Cohesiveness of teams and trust. I mean, you hit it right on the spot. Those are some of the biggest challenges companies have. And I'm also a huge believer that companies, they don't decide because of, cost or not, do we bring people back? There's great fear that the cohesiveness of team is going to fall apart, the creativity, the productivity, et cetera, et cetera. So trust, no question, is a huge issue.
All right. So we were talking about trust commands teams, and I think it's really interesting. I think it goes back to that conversation. Are we wasting time with the interaction? Because we can go back to the restaurant, the hospitality piece that we share. I ask people in just about every single interview, and I get a great response. Sometimes, somebody doesn't have a great response, and then that's a big indication. But I ask people that are coming into a hospitality role with me, what's the best dining experience you've ever had? Now, I don't ask what's the best restaurant you've ever been to, what's the most, interesting. I ask what's the best dining experience. So somebody could, if they have the right kind of perspective or going from what I'm looking for, they could talk about a dinner that they had at home where, people were treated nicely. But inevitably, over and over and over again, the experience of being at a restaurant and having the owner come around to the table and take, 15 seconds to 3 minutes, shaking some hands, thanking folks for being at the table, having some real one-on-one, making sure that they're taken care of. That small interaction ends up being, obviously it's a piece of a larger experience that went well, but it's so interesting that so many times that's the experience that people remember. And that's what, over somebody that may have had many, 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 many dining experiences, especially out over the course of a lifetime, that's the one experience they're going to tell me about in an interview. And it speaks to our role, especially as entrepreneurs, leaders of companies. If we make that one interaction, we may have just a small amount of time to spend with somebody, but we get to choose what we do with those moments. Am I just going to go through a rote kind of thing, or am I going to make it meaningful and impactful?
One of the things, I'm not trying to talk political here, but I happened to be at the Waldorf Astoria when Bill Clinton was president, Bill Clinton. And I saw him essentially every week, every couple of weeks. And I was at a level of the organization within the hotel that I had to interact with him, his staff, first lady, etc. And I can tell you something, like him or not, like the party he's with or not.
I think I know where you're going with this, and I've heard this a million times.
When Bill Clinton would speak to somebody, it didn't matter if you were the only guy in the room with him or there was 5,000 other people in the room, you always felt after you walked away, after he said goodbye to you or whatever else it is, that he actually cared about you and that you mattered in the conversation enough to a guy who was the president of the United States. And I'm not saying this lightly.
I got just a small Bill Clinton story just to go along with
that. Please.
The executive director is sitting down. They're doing this Olympic. They're trying to get the Olympics to come to New York City. So they're at A. Philip Randolph Campus High School. And they use this room that the founder of the nonprofit that I work with, Charles Thompson, he's in the room. And Charles Thompson's sharing this story. Bill Clinton's sitting there, he's just waiting, for his moment to go on. He just happens to be in the room. So they're sharing the room. And in that moment, Bill Clinton compliments Charles Thompson's time, and he just carries that moment with him. So time over time, same kind of thing. He's caring in the moment. He's not just shooting the shit, talking about the weather. He leans in, gets something specific. Such a great lesson to carry forward if you're trying to make some major movements in the world.
And I think if you think about what's the formula behind it, and I'm not suggesting that there's a formula, because I think one of the things people, and we started the conversation with this, it's about authenticity. It's about, am I sensing that you're being real with me? Am I sensing that you're being honest with me? Am I sensing that I'm really getting you, not just some facade? But the thing
how do you shift your intention, right? It's what 100%. Do you intend to do at the moment? Yeah.
But also, am I, it's little things. Pay attention. Are you letting people finish their sentences, or are you already jumping in with the next thought? 1. 2, eye contact. 3, proximity to each other. 4, ever notice that at a cocktail reception, as guys, we do this a lot? I mean, we haven't been to many receptions over the last 15 months. But the point being, we stand next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, and we're having a personal conversation. Come on, dude. Turn to each other. Look at each other's face. Don't stand sideways. Don't scan what else is going on in the room. Look at each other's face. Make that connection. And that is the basics. That is the absolute basics of how, as human beings, guess what? We're just like animals in that respect. That's how we connect. That's how chemistry works. And if you understand that from a neuroscientific standpoint, how easy it actually is if you do those basic things, which are doing nothing else but letting the human being, not the title, not what the position is the person is, but the human being behind it, lets them know you actually are looking to connect with them. I promise everyone listening, everyone viewing this, you will make different connections. And the same thing applies. I see up here on the screen, micromanagement doesn't work. No, it does not. Because micromanagement is all I'm saying to you is, I don't trust you. I don't trust you. I don't trust you. I don't trust you can do it. I don't trust you can do it. I don't trust you can do it. That's it. That's the only word what I'm communicating. Now, sometimes, yes, there is, management and, accountability is necessary. But micromanagement, there is nothing. There's not one version of micromanagement that's good. There's nothing good about it. End of story.
So lay out a couple things, because I know one thing that, helps, and I try to, I have the advantage / disadvantage that most of my staff, I'm not actually working with them. So I have to trust. When I'm on site with staff, it's a little bit more challenging, because then I can insert myself and I can have the ability to micromanage, and I will if I don't control myself, because I get in my head about how important something is to be done right and my way versus just getting it done. But what are some things that folks can do to make sure that they are setting themselves up so that they prevent themselves from micromanaging?
Great question. I think the key question you just asked, and the key word is setting yourself up, right? I think the question is, again, it has to be self-reflective. So first of all, self-awareness, I believe, in any context, is the greatest catalyst for personal growth. But more importantly, to your question, if I'm micromanagement, I need to ask myself, why am I micromanaging? Either it's about me or it's about them. And the point is the person really set up? If I think about servant leadership, is the person really set up to be successful? Do they have the tools, the resources, the access to people, the training, the skills to actually do what I, and not I as me, like the minion, but I as a representative of the organization who's making sure that the quality control is conformant with what I want my product, the outcome, the impact, the experience for people to be. You mentioned hospitality. That's where it starts. And oftentimes when I speak to people, particularly on kind of that emerging leader level, on that VP level, on that rising star level, when they all the emotions come in and they want to do their best, and now the anxiety and the fear comes in that when somebody else does something for them, oh my God, if they don't do it exactly the way I want it done, then it's going to look bad on me. Well, you know what? Let's think about three-dimensional leadership, right? Three-dimensional leadership is about you and them and you, and the entire group amongst each other. So why I'm bringing that up is this. It's not just about you. Micromanagement, the setup to micromanagement is that we need to invest in the short term some time to set people up for success. Let's take a restaurant again. How many times have we been in a restaurant? New server starts, and you're the table which is being taken care of by the new server, and you can tell. And I'm the guy to then ask, hey, how long have you been here? Oh, I just started this morning. You're by yourself already? Oh, yeah, I was trained in the morning, and tonight I'm serving by myself. And the sentence they don't say is like, and everybody is a total shit show. And guess what? We're setting them up for frustration. We're setting them up for a complete disappointment. We're setting them up to probably quit the job, and we're setting the guest up for a terrible experience. But more importantly, let's remember, negative experiences get communicated 10x versus positive 2 to 3x. Old total quality management rule. So The same thing happens for employees. I mean, just pull up Glassdoor, how people talk about companies, how training is, how they prepare to do their job, et cetera, et cetera. You can directly reflect this into what probably the management structure and the awareness of the management team in terms of organizational maturity looks like. So again, to your question, ask yourself the question, why is this person not able to do that? And almost create a punch list. Have they received the right training? Have they attended the training? Were they there? Are they there? Are they? There may be some external factors, which goes back to ask an empathetic question. Hey, you know what, Cameron? I'm noticing that for the last couple of days when you were taking care of XYZ, it doesn't seem like it's the way you usually do things. Or, hey, remember when we spoke about it before? This seems like that there's something is a little off. Is there anything that I can serve and support you with? But again, you don't earn the right to ask the very deep question in the first conversation. It's an ongoing, it's kind of like when not every interaction needs to be a transaction.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that piece as well. Trust is earned by being there when it's not just about a task, a project, in a conversation. There is deep intention behind in terms of getting something done. It's about the human being.
I
People
think I was
people are so simple when we really see them for who they are. There's tremendous magic that can happen.
right, and I mean to that point, like most people are capable of doing a job. So if they're not doing what you want them to do
Yeah,
exactly, have you set up the system? Have you set up the
yeah,
process so that they can actually understand what the role is? Has it been documented? I know that's always
yeah,
been a challenge for me in my business. Like,
yeah.
let's get it down in documentation. And then in that, your business actually improves because you're starting to
Yeah,
see what your systems look like. So then you can
100%.
actually improve them. You can actually improve time, all
Yep.
that. And then there's the other side you're talking about where somebody just isn't getting enough support, or the reverse of that true. The micromanagement is
Yep.
happening and somebody doesn't have enough flexibility to think on their own. So they just throw up their hands and it just becomes that sort of, I'm on my own
Yep.
because I, there's too much, right? It's too much
100%.
input and not enough. Let me create the output that you're looking for.
100%.
It's too rigid, and then that can be a aspect or a result of ego, right? My way is the only way. In order to get across the finish line, you have to walk exactly in my steps. And as we know, the one of the key things of having a team is that people are going to have different approaches. It's not talked about anymore. I think Google has grown so large that they can't do some of the things, or at least they don't prioritize some of the things the same way. I know they do it to some extent, but they
Right.
talked very early on. I'm talking, 2010s. I think there was a story, just about every day about how Google employees had something like 10% of their time they could choose to work on any kind of exploratory project that they wanted. And how many of those projects turned into incredible pieces of software and products for the company that allowed them to grow and expand. Those are some of the more interesting things. And I've seen it within my company when I let people kind of do their thing. Man, you get some incredible
Yep.
results, some really happy clients, some
Yep.
some staff that are like really appreciative
Yep.
of the people they're working with. It's a whole different thing. So talk to us about this ego thing.
I think ego is. I mean, I think we all have. And again, I'm going to make it a little bit U.S. based. I think about 3-4 years ago, suddenly the word narcissism became a big word for a reason that a lot of us understand why it became that way. But I think everybody and most of us have, male as well as female, have narcissistic traits. The question is, how far are they peaking? How far are they coming out? And what it is. And I think ego oftentimes comes from a place of, and I can share my own story, from a place of I'm not enough. So ego oftentimes is a defense mechanism. It becomes an image manager, it becomes a defense mechanism, becomes something that we feel entitlement because we had one success or two successes, and now suddenly everything needs to go my way. And I think oftentimes when ego is really, really strong and jumps into a situation, it really becomes, when I really ask deep questions, then it becomes a defense mechanism. It's overrated, as you said here. It becomes something which is making up for the not enough. It's oftentimes overbalancing one side for the other and compensating for something. Oftentimes, ego and a big wall of an ego is an over boundary of deflection, because I don't want to talk about my own stuff. I don't want to be discovered for something that I'm not. Imposter syndrome comes into that as well. And it becomes a whole slew of defense mechanisms. And the reason why I think it's overrated is because of all the things we talked about before. Because ego is, I think there's an importance. We talk about type A personalities, but that's not necessarily what ego is. I think ego is an awareness. I mean, if we look at ego, what historically ego has been, right? The id, and kind of the part that's I'm conscious of, the part I'm subconscious, not aware of, and then there's the part which kind of drives all the decisions. And a lot of those decisions are based on fear. They're based on survival. They're based on some intricate pieces that if I'm a CEO of an organization and my stock return is not as it should be, and I'm getting a lot of pressure by the board, and I'm getting pressure by the investors and by the C-suite and other people, well, they're probably, what we then interpret as, oh my God, this guy has a huge ego. Is it validated ego in terms of that they've accomplished something and now they're just a little bit flying too high? Or is it actually ego, which is defense mechanism, where they ultimately just don't want to be, they don't want people to come close to them because they could be discovered, as we said earlier, as a fraud. They're not as good as they say they are. They feel insecure, all these kinds of reasons. So it's the ego overrated statement is loaded. There's all kinds of different directions we can go with that. But I do believe that, collaborative, flat organizations to a large extent can function extremely, extremely well. And I think a big part of recognizing that ego is overrated is that you don't have to be the expert at everything. There's a role you play within the organization as the CEO, the president, the chairman. But then there's a lot of other people who bring great experience, expertise, knowledge, empathy to it, and allow people to be a team. And that's, I think, the biggest part, what I would invite everybody to say. If ego is getting in your way, are you really letting everybody play with you rather than just for you? And I'm going to, say something else, because I think words are philosophy. Oftentimes the way we talk about the people we work with versus the people who work for us, that oftentimes is already a reflection of hierarchy and how we look at the people that work with us. Because if I say, oh, this person works for me, that person works for me, that person works for me, well, there's already a hierarchy versus, oh, we're working all together. The we, right? There's an even level, even in the way I talk about it. Words which are conscious, they go into the subconscious and they change actions. That's a fact. That's energy. That's just the way it works. And that applies to anybody at any level in organizations. Same thing with gratitude exercises. If we do 3-4 things we write down in the morning with gratitude, you do this over the course of 2-3 weeks, you are becoming a happier person. That's neuroscientifically proven. Very, very similar. Words have energy. They have energy to ourselves. There's a resonance behind it. And I think we just have to be very aware of that.
I love it. And one of the interesting things about so much of what we've talked about today, maturity. And we're not talking about age, right? We're talking about, are you able to mentally kind of get over whatever preconceptions you thought masculinity or being a boss or being in charge or being a big deal, the work I put in earns me this. It's interesting that, over and over again, we get these memes on social media, like, how you treat your waiter tells me everything I need to know about you. And, are you a good person based on whether you return your shopping cart back from the parking lot to the front of the store, right? Depending on your ability to, have care and concern for your community, right?
Have you heard my explanation what integrity is?
Go ahead. Let's
so my quick example for integrity is this: when you have a dog and you take your dog out at 10:30 at night and you're in a park or in the neighborhood where nobody really watches, and are you actually looking, what's coming now, right? And the dog takes a poop. The question is, are you picking up the poop? And are you looking around to see if somebody's watching and then you decide to pick up the poop, or you just automatically pick up the poop? Good integrity, high level of integrity is you always pick up the poop regardless if somebody's watching or not. Simple as that.
Pick up the poop. I mean, sorry, but it's that simple. And if you kind of draw the parallel to that,
to all your actions. Don't just do it when people's watching. When people are watching, do it when nobody's watching, right?
All right, so that brings us. That's a great segue over to raw rants, right? So we're going to talk about picking up the poop and move into these raw rants. So you're putting together a podcast that
Yep.
you were talking to me about the Yamaha AG06
Yep.
that you're using for your awesome audio with the podcast, which I'm excited because it's not something I'm using. So I was excited for that tip. But talk to us about this raw rants podcast and what we will come to expect from you on this podcast.
You know what I'm going to do now, right? You know what's coming now.
Yeah, here we go.
I'm going to put the music in.
Now we're jamming. And YouTube is going to probably have a horrible problem with this unless you're using copyright free music.
So it's like, this is Stephan Thieringer, and we're at Raw Rants. I should add my echo to it. No, so we're just playing. But so Raw Rants really was for me. It started during the pandemic. After I was kind of a little bit more conscious about my heart attack in the second half of 2020, and it's really exactly what it is. It's for a long time I just started talking to myself and the screen, so to speak. It was probably as much of anything therapeutical, and a lot of the themes that I talk with people about it, clients, guests. In the context of the coffee chat I do every Thursday morning. And then now we're in season 2. And season 2, I'm bringing in some guests. And I have an incredible lineup, which I'm super proud of and super excited about. And we talked about limiting beliefs. It's kind of like, are you going to make the ask or not? And, like I told my daughter her entire life, you can always ask, just be prepared. There can be a yes and a no, or who knows. But so as a first guest, I had somebody who's becoming and has become a dear friend, Shelley Brown, ultra marathon runner, broke her back doing it. It calls herself the Weird Girl, has a company called Weird Girl Adventures. I have somebody coming on. We're releasing the next one with Rihanna Du. She came out of McKinsey, took the jump into entrepreneurship, has a podcast as well. I have coming on, which I'm so honored. Elizabeth, who is a celebrity therapist, Elizabeth Earnshaw, and people who are on Instagram know her. She's super popular on the East Coast. I have a Grammy winner coming on. Lily Hayden's coming on, who, if you watch Netflix, she is somebody who wrote the theme with of Ginny and Georgia, or Georgia and Ginny. I haven't seen it, but I just know that. Which is fantastic.
It's a good show. I've checked it out. Yeah.
I have people coming on who are fashion executives who've built companies in that respect. I had we just got it in the can the other day. My dear friend, and again, I'm privileged, being able to call her a friend, who is one of the top 100 educational influencers and who's created the You Matter movement, Angela Myers. So it's just been an incredible group of people who said yes. So the rhythm is, you're going to have to listen to me one week, and then the second week we publish a podcast with a guest. And it's literally what it is. It's Raw Rants. It's a recording one time through, just kind of we're doing here live on YouTube. There's no retake. There's no stop. There's no nothing. We put music on. We have some fun. We talk some serious questions. And I want people as a takeaway to have, kind of a connection to, maybe they don't connect to every single show piece and every single episode, but I want them to have a takeaway where they can say, oh, interesting. I'm a musician and there came the break, or I'm an educator, here came the break, or maybe I need to have a TEDx talk and talk about it and push that piece. And trust me, guys, I'm a TEDx speaker. My TEDx talk, I look back at it, I wasn't myself. And there's a reason for that, because of all my travel and journey of integrity. There's something the night before happened where I knew my marriage was about to fall apart. And so that's the kind of the mindset I walked into my TEDx talk. But more importantly, there's other avenues putting your message, your talk out than TEDx. So just because TEDx says we don't want you, there is today so many different ways. I think I read a number last week, and you may know this better than I do because you're closer to the event industry. I think every day there's 6,500 keynotes people are looking for. And it's so easy to make something go viral today if you do it with, again, the community. And some generous support of friends and family and connections you make. And again, it goes back to, this is all one big circle here. Then more genuine and authentic the connections are, then more help you're going to get. And one of the things I'm learning with Raw Rants is I don't need to be the expert. I know people who have podcasts which are unbelievable, And I text them and I say, hey, what should I do? Well, don't put the big Roadcaster, buy the little Yamaha. Don't do this, do that. In your next version, you can think about that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, I'm taking the lazy shortcut, right? But it's one of those things where, I love it. And for me, really the focus right now is Human Innovation Garage, the executive coaching piece together with really helping organizations and partnering with organizations and optimizing their talent and really discovering we don't have to put square pegs in round holes. Let's understand who people are. Let's communicate with vulnerability, empathy. And then on the other side, Raw Rants, it's fun for me. It's my Hinder DJ, which comes out. And so that's, so I'm having fun with it, and it's awesome.
Now, I know I have your LinkedIn address down below on the YouTube description. If you're on Facebook, it's off to the side there. Who do you want to get in touch with you, and how should they reach out to you?
So if you're interested in the podcast, we are on all major podcast platforms. We have a website as well, which is rawrants.com. Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, Pandora, you name it, we're all out there. Google. On the Human Innovation Garage, very simple, humaninnovationgarage.com. For me, it's really, it's always a conversation. I don't want to say yes or no to anybody. I think if there's pieces that you connected with here, what you heard about, and pieces that you felt they resonated, reach out. If this is somebody where you say, I know this really cool person who should be on your podcast, I would be immensely grateful for that as well. Because I'm not at the point with the podcast where my door is being hammered down because they all want to be on my podcast. So that's one piece. The second piece, if you individually or from an organization, if you're in kind of that phase of, I would say, 50 plus employees and you're starting to see some patterns develop within the organization that you want to understand more, are the right people in the right place? Are you really a high performing team and the culture reflective of that, which is value based, which then may go to you back to talk about, how are you leading? I'd love the introduction. I'd love to reach out and I'll always make myself available within time to a conversation. So like many of us, the calendars plan out a little bit in advance, but just because I'm not available today does not mean that there's less curiosity, interest, and sincerity to connect.
Yeah, I love that point. Be patient. I got folks that are like, yeah, I want to talk today. And it's like, all right, I got some stuff to do today, but I really want to talk to you. I just can't fit it all in. So I got a calendar that's open in July, and people are like, "What, July?" But we got a lot of life. It's a lot of. But you were talking about before. There is, people want to be exactly like somebody else, or they're afraid to go into the product because they might provide. It's an abundance world. There's a lot out there. So everybody check out Raw Rants podcast. Check out the Human Innovation Garage with Stephan Thieringer, amazing coach, somebody that is just awesome to talk to. Stephan, I'm going to let you say goodbye. It was a great show. We went long, but it was fun. And I'll play us off with the Biz Dev theme.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Cameron.
Appreciate you.
Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. This is business development, not even selling it. This is intelligent. If you watch it, I promise you benefit. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Leadership and motivation, empathy and inspiration. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz Dev Live, weekdays at 11 Eastern Time. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T. Biz D with C, brought to you by Cameron T.